Hi everyone! Today we're talking about the differences between ISTJ and ISTP. I'm basically continuing a series that I started a while ago with respect to looking at the differences between personality types that can be confused for each other. I've made several videos on this topic, for example, INFP versus INTP, ENTP versus ENTJ, ISTP versus INTJ, and so on and so forth. So feel free to check that out. And today we will be focusing on comparing two other personality types that can look quite similar, even though there are quite a lot of differences between them. ISTP, ISTJ. So all about that in the next few minutes. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. Okay, so ISTPs and ISTJs. There are obviously quite a lot of things that these two types have in common. 3 out of the 4 letters or preferences: introversion, sensing, and thinking, as well as the same interaction style based on Linda Burns's model. Both ISTPs and ISTJs belong to the same group, the chart the course group or finisher group. And what this means is that on the outside, in the way they interact with other people, in the way they interact with tasks and work, they can appear to be quite similar to each other. So what makes them different? And to answer that question, I'm going to be looking at differences in cognitive functions, because the two types have completely different functions in the ego stack in the first 4. And I will also be touching a little bit upon the differences in temperament, according to David Kurz's theory of artisans versus guardians. So, looking at cognitive functions. The ISTP is an introverted thinking hero type or dominant type, whereas the ISTJ is an introverted sensing dominant or hero type. Then, if we look at the parent function, the ISTP has extroverted sensing, whereas the ISTJ has extroverted thinking. So, firstly, a very simple difference is the thinking versus sensing domination or hero archetype. With ISTPs, we have a stronger reliance on their thinking function, primarily the introverted one, and a bit of a lack of balance with respect to their inferior function, which is extroverted feeling. The bigger, let's say, discrepancy is between thinking and feeling, whereas for ISTJ, this bigger discrepancy is between sensing and intuition, because extroverted intuition is their inferior function. So this is a little tip, something that I sometimes use to tell these two types apart. If we look at where they seem to be more insecure or a little bit more uncomfortable, we will notice that the ISTP, relying so much on their introverted thinking, they might appear to be more insecure about stuff related to FE, to extroverted feeling, how other people feel about them, whether other people love them or appreciate them, wanting to create social harmony or being perplexed by social harmony, yet not being entirely sure how to go about it, or not necessarily wanting to talk about it. Whereas for ISTJ, who have extroverted intuition as an inferior function, more insecurity and more fear comes around the idea of envisioning possibilities, thinking in terms of what-if scenarios that are not necessarily based on reality and concrete experience, but rather represent more conceptual, abstract things. So this is a pretty notable difference, and sometimes can come across as more obvious than other differences. Another one is that if we look at the thinking functions, even though both of these types are thinkers, one of them is an introverted thinker, the other one is an extroverted thinker. I've made a long-form video on this topic, TI versus TE, so feel free to check that out. What I'm going to mention here is that something quite typical for the difference between these two types of thinking is that introverted thinking is more likely to want to make sure that external facts or pieces of information make sense in their internal logical framework, which is why they might spend a little bit longer trying to analyze how something works, whether something makes sense, because they want to make sure that they have a thorough, deep understanding of a particular topic so that they can then make a decision based on that. Extroverted thinking, on the other hand, has a more proactive and decisive vibe to it, which is more typical of the ISTJ. Extroverted thinking has less patience for analyzing something and trying to see if it makes sense. It's not that they don't do it, they just don't do it as much as the introverted thinking types. And they are more focused on externalizing their thinking process in such a way that they create concrete results in the real world, in such a way that other people can also benefit from their logic. Again, introverted thinkers like the ISTP are a bit less concerned with externalizing this thought process and creating systems for other people. They're more interested in creating a system for themselves and making sure that they really understand something. Which is why I notice a stronger tendency to procrastinate among ISTPs. I'm not saying that everyone does this or that it happens all the time, etc., etc., but the ISTPs are more likely to procrastinate because they feel like they cannot take action until they have this thorough understanding of a topic, which TI really values. It values a lot of complexity in thinking, but sometimes it can be a little bit slower in taking concrete action to create concrete results. Extroverted thinking might say, well, I really enjoy seeing how things work in the real world and kind of externalizing what I think about something, making a system that works for a group, for other people, and kind of having more control over this external environment. Another thing that I really like saying here is that you will notice that a lot of introverted thinking types like ISTPs are more likely to answer a question with "it depends." Because TI likes seeing all of these shades, and their logic might compose of little pieces that come together in a system to kind of create a holistic understanding of something. And there's more reluctance into saying that this is a definite statement. Extroverted thinking, on the other hand, is more likely to try to simplify a specific, information or system or whatever, in such a way that that simplification can be applied. Now, what we must be careful with here is that, it's not like introverted thinking or extroverted thinking is better or worse. There are times when one works better than the other, and the other way around as well. So both of these have immense benefits, but they can also be costly for the person unless balanced, of course. And one more thing here is that introverted thinking, so ISTPs, focuses more on what they believe to be logical, what they believe to make sense, sometimes disregarding external logic coming from other people. Whereas extroverted thinking places more value on verifying what they know with experts, for example, or with an external body of knowledge, which is why they might look more for what experts have to say in a specific field to help them with a particular decision. And it's not that they don't value an internal logical system. Sometimes they might feel like we do not have time to think so much about this. We might as well validate it externally or make sure that we're on the same page. Which is why, in my opinion, extroverted thinking is quite amazing at delegating. Okay? And now I would also like to talk about the sensing functions. So ISTPs have extroverted sensing, whereas ISTJs have introverted sensing. Extroverted sensing is more focused on connecting their senses and their presence with the external environment in such a way that they can best make use of opportunities that arise in the environment. A lot of the times we connect this function with the idea of being in the moment, which is not necessarily the right description. It's not necessarily bad either, but it's not that SE types like the ISTP are necessarily mindful or present, because everyone struggles with their own anxieties and fears, and sometimes the mind wanders. As a parenthesis here, during my psychology degree, I learned about the concept and the neuroscience of mind wandering. And research in this field actually shows that most people spend about 50% of their time mind wandering, so not being present, okay, including extroverted sensing types. So what this is more about is their ability to tune in to the environment, to what's happening, the sounds and the visual aspects of things and actions and things going on in the real world, connecting to that and noticing when opportunities in the environment arise so that they are ready to act on them afterwards. They are also very realistic. I would say that ISTPs together with ESTPs are probably the most realistic types, because their extroverted sensing paired with their introverted thinking makes them highly analytical and using a lot of critical thinking while also being connected to the reality. They can be really good at giving people reality checks, for that matter. On the other hand, ISTJs with introverted sensing, like I mentioned in the video about ISFJs and INFJs, the introverted sensing is a function that is also sensory based, it's also concrete and realistic, but it is more focused on the impression that experiences leave on them. So things happen, experiences happen, and introverted sensing absorbs these experiences and highly connects to the impression that the experiences leave on them, which is why a lot of the times introverted sensing gets associated with the idea of memory or past thinking or traditions. Again, we must not take these things literally, because no function equals one word and that's it, okay? We can have some keywords to help us think about that function, but it's not the whole story. So because introverted sensing is so connected to the way that their experiences shape them, they might be more connected to their memories, they might be more connected to their past, but that doesn't mean that these people are stuck in the past. That's something we have to understand here, okay? ISTJs can think a lot about the future. I know a lot of ISTJs who care about planning and structuring and preparing for future scenarios, okay? So that's an important thing to kind of take into account here. ISTJs are also realistic, like ISTPs, but I would say that they have a tendency to be a bit more sentimental as well, because of the introverted sensing and the introverted feeling. And because of that, there is a tendency to kind of be less immersed into reality. But they are still realistic, okay? Then, the feeling functions. So ISTPs have extroverted feeling, whereas ISTJs have introverted feeling. So here, if we speak about values and feelings and the connected ideas, for the ISTJ with introverted feeling child, so tertiary function, it is more important to connect to their internal set of values and make decisions based on that. So ISTJs will often have a pretty good understanding of how they feel about something and what's important to them on an emotional level, which is why they value being authentic to those values a little bit more than the ISTP. Because the ISTP has extroverted feeling as an inferior function and then introverted feeling as a demon function, they do not care as much about their values. I've heard a lot of ISTPs say, I don't care about the values, or values change. Values are not what I base my decisions on. I base my decisions on what makes sense. And that is not to say that they do not have values. Everyone has values, okay? But the importance that we place on them in our decision-making process changes. Okay, and lastly, I'm going to be talking about differences in temperaments. ISTPs are artisans, which means that, according to David Kersey, they are more likely to enjoy playing with the environment and creating something out of that. We get the stereotype a lot from social media that ISTPs are the mechanics and Bob the Builder and all that, okay? And probably the stereotypes are based on David Kersey's framework, that ISTPs are mechanics, but that doesn't mean that they will work as a mechanic, okay? Some ISTPs do not like to do this. They're not interested in this. It's more the symbol behind it, that we can notice a tendency in the ISTPs to think a lot about how something works and also tinkering around to make sure they contribute to how something works, which is what can create the idea of this archetype, quote unquote. ISTJs, on the other hand, being guardians, are more focused on having a collaborative approach rather than a utilitarian approach like the ISTPs. And they're more focused on preserving things that exist in the society, in the family, in the, workplace, and so on and so forth, which is something that is more specific to the guardian temperaments. Okay, so these are my main thoughts on the differences between ISTPs and ISTJs. If you want to go deeper with the functions, feel free to check out my cognitive function videos. I go into more detail and more explanation there. And as always, thank you a lot for watching this video. For those of you who are new here and don't know about it, I also offer coaching sessions because I'm a certified professional life coach. These coaching sessions are aimed at supporting you engage in a process of self-awareness and work towards your personal development goals. I also have a newsletter where I write articles about typology and other psychology-related aspects about twice a month. So I will link these two things in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching this video and see you next time with another video on typology.